We now turn to our final speaker this evening, Simon McCoy. Simon is a journalist and former newsreader on BBC News and Sky News, and a presenter at GB News. He was the main presenter of the BBC One News at 1, and has covered everything from the Iraq War to the royal family. Simon, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I feel I've had a bit of a history lesson tonight. Perhaps let's just look at this motion. This House believes the press has too much power. Has. We're talking about now. April 1989, which you referred to, much of your speech was about. Many of you weren't born. I was there. I went to Liverpool. I'd just joined a new company called Sky, but had launched 3 months before, owned by Rupert Murdoch. We got to Liverpool, we checked in our hotel, and I got a message, I think we had mobile phones, only just saying, get out, come back. The headline in The Sun had caused so much anger, and you talk about a lack of accountability, and I remember at the time, the people of Liverpool had made a decision that they weren't prepared to put up with those lies, and here we are 30 years later, and you cannot buy a copy of The Sun. Now, if that isn't reader accountability, I don't know what is. It's a history lesson. It is not the press now, and I think we do need to just keep reminding ourselves of what the proposal is. It's about what's happening now. And the press now is very, very different from the one that I trained to go into. I trained as a newspaper journalist. We trained in law, we trained in government, local and national government. I did shorthand, I did typing. I didn't train to hack phones or how to bribe a police officer or how to chase a princess through a tunnel until she's dead. That's not what the journalism I joined was about. And I just want to make the point that I still believe very much it isn't the press we have now. I could, as we have already heard, pick out headlines from the Daily Mail, and believe me, if being nasty was a crime, most journalists on most of the papers we've talked about would be in prison. And I would happily be visiting them, some news presenters as well. But it's not a crime. Being nasty is something I'm afraid we just have to put up with on the whole. This is difficult for me because I think 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, I'd be sitting there with you. I'd be proposing this motion. But I think, as I say, we have a press now that is struggling a bit because we have a system of government, and we've seen it this week, which, when it decides it doesn't like what might be written, it has recourse to go to law. We've got a former Chancellor of the Exchequer who was trying to block a journalist from looking into his tax affairs, going to law to do so. We have a Russian oligarch this week, it turns out, who's used the law to try to stop his involvement with the Russian group, which is causing such chaos in Ukraine. There are things going on that, and we've talked about it here, that the press are showing you, the public, that otherwise would go unpunished. And when we talk about accountability, I'll come to accountability later. And of course, the press must be held accountable for its action if it fails to meet it. Yeah.
Isn't silence a form of power? You talk about holding people accountable for bad stories, but what about the stories that don't get written? What about the Zahawi scandals that don't get broken? That's a form of power too, and who holds someone accountable for that?
Well, if you've got a story, give it to me before I go, because I'd like to make some money out of it. I don't think... I'm all for conspiracy theories, but and my word, there are more conspiracy theories than the press is dealing with. And I'll come into social media later on as well. But if the press fails to meet legal and ethical responsibilities, it is held accountable. And most of the time, the press in this country upholds those legal and ethical responsibilities, I believe. Yes, The Sun, yes, the Mail get it wrong, and quite often. That front page of the Judges, enemies of the state, was appalling. But don't think that the British press thinks that's what's going on, and that is acceptable behaviour. The British press does not. And at the heart of this is trust in journalism and in journalists. And I've had the history lesson on Hillsborough, and I'm sorry, I just think it's totally irrelevant to what we're doing with today. We haven't really touched on Leveson, which went into the appalling behavior of phone hackers, the Millie Dowler case. I think Evan Harris, if he'd been here tonight, would have very much gone into that, and rightly so. And I would make the point that I think the press after Leveson is now very, very different. Again, we'll come to the accountability.
So where are Piers Morgan and Rupert Murdoch now?
Where are they?
Yeah, where are they?
Well, Rupert Murdoch is
Sorry.
in Barbados, I think, and is not long for this world. Piers Morgan has, I think, 2,000 viewers a night on Talk TV.
In terms of power and status, where are they? The Millie Dowler scandal, hacking a dead girl's phone, that didn't damage them. It might have damaged their reputation. They still reached the same amount of people. They still spread their lies and their slander.
Two journalists, Clive Goodman from the News of the World and Andy Coulson, went to prison for hacking. The News of the World shut down because of hacking. There was accountability there. So I'll move on. What at the heart, and you mentioned this, what is journalism? What is it that we as journalists are trying to do? It's the business of monitoring and keeping a check on people in institutions and in power. And it acts as a watchdog. That's absolutely holding people to account. It's never going to be popular with powerful people, by definition. But it is the essence of speaking truth to power. And if you seek to put some sort of restraint on that, well, I think all hell follows. Therein madness lies, I think. You won't have stories like Partygate, Windrush, anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, expenses scandal, sexual abuse in towns such as Rotherham. We've mentioned Watergate already, which is the reason many people went into journalism back in the early 70s. And it was the Washington Post. The problem for the press is this trust issue. The good news for the press is it's up. It's now at 37% from 34%. Trust in social media is lower still. My personal belief is two stories have changed everything for us in the media and the press. One was Brexit and the other was the pandemic. I have long been told that newspapers are dying. I remember in the 70s and 80s, everybody said, oh, they've got 10 years left. They keep going. And again, I do want to make this point. The press that many people here are thinking about and the stories that they're thinking about were in the past. And we need to look to the future. And we need to look at what is in place now in terms of accountability. Hang on a minute. I just want, I'll probably breach of every rule. Hands up, who looked at a newspaper this morning? Yeah, they're not that powerful, are they? The explosion of social media, that has its own problems. We're hearing from primary sources, and that's great. People can go straight to that. But there are so many of them. They all have their own agenda. And we've talked about fact-checking, again, over there. Crucial, and you may have noticed, certainly in television, fact-checking is now something, a road they're going down. It was very much put into motion during the pandemic because of all the disinformation that was going around during that. And fake news works if you don't have that filter. And I think more and more, certainly television, radio stations will be doing that. We've seen this week that free and fair journalism brings uncomfortable stories to those in power. Nadeem Zahawi, we've spoken about, Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, Richard Sharp as chairman of the BBC, stories that have come from a free press. I also ought to mention, we always have, I think, 5 or 6 people's faces in mind when we're talking about those evil people in the press. Murdoch's one of them. None of us has the faces of the 100 journalists who died in the last year doing their job. It's a profession which is being very much damaged by the acts of a very small number. And that's a point I really do want to make. Yeah, all right.
I don't think people here broadly disagree with the notion that the press has a significant role. But when we're talking about things like retractions of front-page racism remarks and the margin of the second page, I think the discussion shifted to whether or not that's...
That comes under accountability, and I absolutely agree. And there are 2 regulatory bodies, Ipsos and in press, if Evan Harris, I don't want to do his job for him, he described Ipsos as the Press Complaints Commission with lipstick, that it's utterly pointless. One of the things that it was supposed to put into action was wherever the story that was wrong was printed, that's where the apology should go. I agree with that, and I actually think that has to change. And there is huge pressure for that from other journalists, from many of us are making that point. And I actually think that would make a huge difference. I also make the point that no journalist I know has ever printed something that they knew was going to be wrong, because there are huge issues if you get something wrong. And I've been sued twice. It's not a nice experience. You don't want to go through it.
Just on this specific point, I get that someone will sue you if you're going to someone who's big. But what about when it's minorities? What about when it's punching down? In those circumstances, I know of cases. I mean, look at these. I know of these cases where there's lies across a whole double-page spread. There were 15 lies that were caught, and they had to be corrected later. Like these types of journalists have got away with it.
Well, they haven't, though, have they? I mean, your job is to hold the press accountable, and you are, and you're doing an amazing job. So, is it facing accountability? Yes, it is.
But they're still there. They're still journalists.
Journalists make mistakes. We all make mistakes. We've made that point as well. I feel that I can feel the tension. I know, but you. Oh my word! Let's go to accountability. Let's talk about Prince Harry, who apparently is going to make his life's work to make the press accountable. Well, thank God he's got something to do, and I wish him well. My real worry, and I agree with much of what you've said about the Mail and the Sun and the despicable things that they do, and I can't see that it'll end too soon, but people are buying the papers. But I do worry really, really about the regional and provincial press in this country, which is dying. In many parts of the country, it's dead already. That means council meetings, courts, police are getting away with everything because no one is there to report it. And rather than lump the press as the Mail and the Sun, let's not forget that we're talking about something much broader and actually much more important to us. Social media has its place. I wish it didn't. But I think the worry is, are you being manipulated, or are you going to go into your lives as people who will manipulate and try to make things better? I don't think you're being manipulated as a whole. I certainly have worked in this industry for 40 years, and I'm still proud to say I trained in the press, and I think the British press is amongst the best in the world. And on the days it appalls you, it appalls me. But thankfully, I think those days are fewer and fewer. I'm getting a filthy look from down here. But I do believe that things are getting better. And finally, let's just look at that proposal. This House believes the press has too much power. Really, not enough accountability. The accountability is there. There are those who are practicing it here tonight. And I think we have a great tradition in this country of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And if we bring tighter restrictions or expect tougher restrictions on the press, we will rue the day fairly quickly. So I really urge you to oppose this motion.